On tonight's episode, we're going to show you how to reupholster an antique chair. Really isn't that complicated. Hardly cost you anything to do it other than your time, maybe a little extra padding. Basically, we're going to use what we already have to do it. So it's really your time. And I encourage you to try to do this because A, it's not overly complicated. B, I think the enjoyment you're going to get out of doing it really is awesome, and having that sense of pride of doing it yourself. So here's a couple of pictures before and after, and then we're going to show you step by step how to take it apart and how to reupholster it. Thanks for watching. Hello everyone, Scott Weaver with Designer's Workroom. So I asked Alexa this morning what was new, and she told me that the spork was invented 144 years ago. Well, you know, that's when they combined the fork and the spoon together to make a spork. Good morning.
Good morning. 144 years ago this month, spoons and forks were combined to create the spork. I admire inventions that pack a lot of utility, with a twist of fun.
Alexa, what was the date 144 years ago?
144 years ago was February 18th, 1874.
Thank you. Well, that was interesting, because today we're going to be covering how to reupholster an antique chair. And I also looked up when the stapler was invented. And the stapler was invented, the first known stapler, not like this of course, is much bigger, but that was in or around 1937, at least that's when a lot of the patents had started coming through. Now, why is that important to upholstering a chair? It really isn't. Except back in the day, they didn't use staples. They used little nails to upholster. And that's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be showing you how to take apart this chair, and it's not that bad. It only costs a few dollars to reupholster. So let's go take a look, see the tools that you need, and take a look at how to do this properly with little expense and really only a few hours, and you'll be glad you did. So let's get to work. Okay, so this is the chair we are going to be tackling. Now the first thing you want to do, what I would recommend you do, is take pictures of it. Alright, take notes of how the corners were done. Although this corner isn't done great, there's room for improvement on it. But you take notes on how the cutouts are done, how this is. So take the pictures of it first before you start ripping it apart. And that way you have something to compare to. Okay. Secondly, you'll want to look at the coils that are underneath it to see how they're looking. And in this case, this is what it looks like underneath, and you can tell that the springs definitely need to be tightened in this. And so we're not going to actually replace any of this. We're just going to retighten it and reset these springs. You notice that there's these little ties here. And those ties are because they go around the coils, and that's what's keeping the coil springs in place, are all these little ties. This was an excellent job at the time. And this is the jute strapping here, which you can still buy today if you want to totally replace it. We're not going to go into that far into depth of it. Now, this has already been taken off. I didn't take it off. It must have fallen off or whatever. But anytime you're doing some upholstery, anything you can save that makes your life easier, don't just like rip everything out. Try to, in this case, it's these little nails in here. Try to take out the nails and save these as a pattern, especially when it comes to the top of it. Now, if the top is really ripped or torn, then I recommend taking some measurements now of it while it's got the cushion on it, so you can get a bearing and then cut a square piece of fabric. Now, it could be just as simple as taking an extra piece of fabric and bringing it around to where it begins. You can see where it begins right there, and taking a measurement in the length of it, and then coming across the widest part and taking the width of it, and cutting yourself a square right from there. You are going to want to make a pattern. If this is already torn, you're going to want to make a pattern of it and do some dry fitting to it. That will definitely work much better than just trying to take a piece of fabric and going ahead and upholster it. So take your time with that part of it. Now, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take all this trim off, which is nailed. Now, the tools you're going to want to have to do something like this, you're definitely going to want to have a pair of needle nose pliers. The needle nose pliers are going to come in handy for taking out staples that you make a mistake with, for number one, when you go to staple this back on, but also sometimes getting some of the tacks out. You're going to possibly want an upholsters. This is what some of the upholsters use, although I don't care for it. But a lot of upholsters use these. They've got the curved end and has a little fork in there for helping to pull it out. But my choice is just a basic screwdriver. It's got a nice wide base to it, and it doesn't hurt your hands when you're pulling things out. That's just my personal preference. And of course, you're going to need a pair of scissors. A tape measure comes in handy. And I like this Old English scratch cover. It comes in a light and a dark color. And after I get everything off, I kind of rub this on and take care of, you can see around back side of here where this has been put on. I think somebody might have glued it or something, but there's some, you can see where there's no, there's nothing on here as far as a stain. So maybe just a little light sanding and covering it over with some of that scratch cover would come in handy. You're also going to want a piece of batting. Now, the piece of batting right here, this is very cheap. You can go to a Joann's Fabric or any fabric store or an upholstery place, and this is 1-inch batting. It's Dacron batting is called. And the reason why I use this is because I like to build up the top of it. Now, underneath here, besides being tacked on with these nails, this goes back. I'm thinking this chair probably goes back to the early 1900s, probably from anywhere from 19 to 1935, possibly even older. I'm not sure. And that's why we're talking about a stapler, because a stapler wasn't invented, at least this type of stapler wasn't invented, and that's why they used the nails. Underneath here, you're going to find cotton, pretty much so from the cotton fields. Most likely, it's just regular cotton, and also horsehair. horsehair and maybe even a little bit of hay mixed in with it. That's what they did at the time. So this is definitely, and I want to keep the authenticity of that. I want to leave that on there and only add just a little background to it. As for the springs underneath here, other than tightening up the jute straps under here, that's about all I'm going to do to it. But I'm not going to do that until I take the fabric off, so the springs can pop back up into the natural spot. Now, I already went ahead, because I've already upholstered one of these, and I'm going to show you that in a second. But you're going to want to make a pattern, and if you fold my pattern in half, it's exactly, and it has the exact cutouts for it. But I'll show you how I derived at that, and pretty much so I took the cover off, and when you take the cover off, that's your pattern. Somebody's already done half the work for you. However, you do want to add extra to it, because once you raise these springs up and you add another piece of background on here, if you don't cut it a little bit bigger, then you could be stretching it a lot tighter than you should be. So you're going to have two pieces. You're going to have your material that you're covering it with, also a piece of a lining that when you take everything off, you add your background, which we'll show you how to do. And then you're going to take your lining piece, and it could be just a scrap piece of lining that you have hanging around, maybe. Lining, this is a drapery lining, it's 100% cotton. It doesn't have to be that. It has to be something that's going to be a medium weight, though, that's going to support the springs and support the padding that you're putting on it. And I can already tell by the white here, it already had on it. Plus, I've already reupholstered one of these, and I'll show you what that looks like, too. Besides that, you can see where they put the trim around here. I didn't elect to do that on the new one. I didn't have to. And around here, and this could be just the fact that it's old, but you can see some of the raw edges. So so when you see that, when you cut your new pattern, make sure you cut it out just a little bit with extra, that you can really stuff that, bend it in. Now I'm going to show you one that I've already done, so you can see the comparison. This is the one I've done. Now, this is called GIMP, and it's the same as what there. It's very pliable and goes around. And I couldn't find a GIMP that was wide enough to cover what I needed to cover. Hopefully you can see that. So I had to go around it twice. And this is the GIMP that I used right here. So I used 2 layers of it to go around. And so this is what covers all your staples. And your hot glue, that's all you need. And it is very, very hard. You can't move that now. I mean, you'd really have to pry it off. So if you don't think hot glue is good, it really is. It soaks into here good, and it soaks into the fabric pretty good. And so that's another consideration, is just a hot glue gun. That's all you need. Heat it up good, and you'll be able to put it on. And I'm going to recommend that you use an air staple gun. This is hardwood. Not that you can't do it with a regular plunk stapler, but you'd be taking a hammer and nailing them in. So you either want a good electric stapler, or you're going to want to use an air stapler. Air staplers today, I mean, you know, you can find them online for $50. You can buy a used one. Anything that'll shoot 3/8 to a 1/2 inch crown will be fine, and anywhere from 1/4 to a 1/2 inch long will subdue as for the leg of the staple. So this one is an upholstery staple. It's got the long neck on it, which helps getting into the corners. But you don't necessarily need that. You just need a stapler. So anyway, what we're going to do now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully take the fabric off this one. And then we're going to put this on to the fabric that we want to use. And we're going to cut it out. So I'm going to begin taking this stuff off here. I'm not going to show you that really, but basically I'm going to take my my screwdriver, pop them out, and it should come off fairly easy because all it is nail. When I get done with this first layer, then we're going to show you what's underneath here. And once we get everything off, then we can go ahead and tighten these coils up. I'm going to show you what this one looks like here. And if you notice, you can see quite a bit of sagging in here. Let me show you the one that I had already done. And you can see here, it is nice and tight and firm. And that's what's giving this the crown. If you look at the comparative of crowns, this one's crowned up because it's a combination of tightening the springs and just adding a little bit of this batting to give it a little extra plushness to it. Anyhow, I'm going to take this fabric off, and then we're going to see what's underneath it, and we'll go from there. With all the little nails removed, and this is what they look like right here, you can see that. That's what was in there. It's very common of the early 1900s up to like 1950 even to use these little nails. Anyhow, so I've got it all off here. All the way around it seems to be off. And you take a good look at what you've got. And then you can just remove it. Now, if this is looking good to you, and you just want to replace the fabric, then this is the time to do it. For me, it's not. And you can tell right here. You see how this is very loose right here? That's because the springs have to come back up, and everything's stretched, and the padding's even gotten loose to it, of course, because it's this is an old chair. So anyhow, this is your pattern, and this is what you would use. Putting on your fabric. And my recommendation, if you're going to add padding to this, add a little extra going around it. We'll show you that in a little while, but I would add at least like another ½ inch all the way around here. So now we're going to remove this here. This is like a muslin type of a fabric on here, and we're going to replace with lining, but we have to remove this first. Easier to tighten these springs where there's nothing on the top of it to hold it back. And in this case, by pushing on here, this is going to restrict the springs from going up a little farther. So I'd rather pull this off, plus I want to add the batting. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull this piece off. And again, if you can get these pieces off without ripping them or tearing them, you can use them right for a pattern. So it makes it much easier to put back on. Here we go. We've got all the little tacks out of here, so we can peel back the fabric, the material on here that's holding it. And I do recommend, if you're going to do this, to recut a new one. Don't try to use this. It's already too old and fragile. So cut a new piece. I used to use 100% cotton lining, but you can use anything that's thin like this. So we'll remove this piece here. And now we're to the good stuff. Now we've got the layer of cotton and horsehair is what's in here. Now I love taking apart history, and that's what it comes down to. And I want to preserve this. I want to reuse it. I don't want to just take this off. I want to use this in conjunction with the piece of dacron that I'm going to put on here. And just to give it some extra oomph to it. But I have to, I'm going to remove this now because I have to flip it over and we have to look at the springs. Now this should just come off fairly easy, and I'm going to tip it. Once I get it off, I'm just going to tip it upside down to hold the whole thing in place. And see, that's what we have right there. Oh, it's got a little leaves in there. It's got a little bit of everything. Piece of history. I love it. I really do. So we're going to hold that to the side. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to flip this over into the garbage can, get the excess off of here. Then we're going to flip it over and we're going to take a look at the springs. All right, so here is where the burlap is right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all these nails out. You can notice these nails are a little larger than the tacks that they used in around here. Also, you can see this right here where this string is. That is what's holding these coils in place so they don't slip out. They went ahead, it started right here because there's a knot right here, and then they went all the way around it with one continuous string looping it, which brings me to this point. You see this one right here, this string right here? That's what was put on here, tacked. They wrapped it around and tacked it. So when I'm done stretching it, I'm going to want to make sure that either I tie this or I tie it back and I don't leave it loose. So now we're just going to pull these all apart right here, pull this out. I'm only doing one side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take each individual one of these and I'm going to stretch them and I'm going to staple them back down. I'm going to compress the springs. Let me put it back over to the other side here. And that's why I wanted to make sure. This is what it looks like. And again, they did the same thing here. All these are holding the springs in. And as you can see, when I lift up on here, you can see the springs go back up. So that's why I wanted to take the fabric right off of it, because I wanted to make sure that nothing's keeping it from coming back up at least a little bit. So now there's all different stages of restoration. I could have totally replaced this, taken the coils out, replace all the coils, and it all depends on what a customer wants to pay for. Actually, this customer only wanted the upholstery part of it done, but I just can't do that. I've got to go back and I've got to fix the springs a little bit, tighten up the strapping, and then add a little bit more Dacron to it to make it a little bit more plush. I didn't want to let it go. When you sat in it, it's really bouncy here compared to that one. That now it's not bouncy at all. So we got to go ahead and we've got to do it right, fix it right. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull these out here, and then okay, all the little nails are out of these three. Now all I'm going to do is, with one hand, I'm going to compress the spring and stretch it. Just like that, and then I'm going to staple it. That's why an air stapler works better for this. But I'm going to do more to this too, because this is old jute and probably should be replaced, but the customer really didn't want to pay for it. So I'm just going to retighten this one up. But then when I'm done with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another strapping to it also. That's going to retighten everything too. Now those three. Now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to take these out. For me to have to replace this jute and have to retie everything, it's way more than what the customer wants to spend on it. So I'm trying to do it in the most economical way for her. Anyhow, I'm going to pull these staples out right now, and then we're going to go ahead. We're going to tighten this up right here. So now I've tightened up this cross section on both sides of here of the jute webbing. Now for an added layer of protection, I'm going to take this, which is just left over some umbrella fabric. This is very, very tight woven, and it does not stretch, and that's why I'm using this material. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come across here. I'm going to staple this down good on one side, stretch it over to the other side, just to help protect the jute because it is older, and Good. Now I'm going to clean this up a little bit more. I cleaned my table up. So this is the piece of fabric we removed from the chair, and I was painstakingly took all the tacks out, the upholstery tacks out, so I could preserve this piece so I can use it for a template. Now went ahead and I cut 2 pieces of lining that I'm going to put on top of here. Now there's a couple of things to point out. If you look at these corners right here where it's kind of looks like it's eaten out, you don't want to follow that. You're actually going to want to make this probably about 3/4 to an inch wider coming around here and also in here. Undercutting things okay, you can always trim off. Overcutting things where it may not fit, that could be a mistake. And since we are building this up with a little Dacron and we built up the springs a little bit, we want to ensure that this is going to fit the first time and not have to recut material because we had made this our replacement piece of fabric too small. So I went ahead, this one here I folded in half, I put 2 notches in it, and then I drew a line. And the reason why I did that is because this is the one that I'm going to use on my material, and my material has a motif. So I want to make sure my motif is centered. Okay, so there's my line, my center line. The other one doesn't have that because this is the one that we are going to first upholster on, and what that's going to do is I'm going to put the batting, the polyester batting, on top of the horsehair and cotton, and this piece right here is going to be the liner, and what it's going to do is it's going to calm down that batting, so when I upholster it in the material, it is going to form much better and it's going to be much smoother. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay both of these on top, folded in half, like so. Now in this particular case, when I fold this in half, it really does line up pretty darn good. And because there were multiple chairs made in this, I'm sure the person who had cut this originally had made a pattern and had made multiple cuts using the pattern. So when I fold this, you can see that these are all lined up, which is really a good thing. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut, and I'm going to leave a generous amount on here. And I'm going to go right around this, making sure I'm cutting this bigger. And then as I get into these here, I'm coming in. I'm not going to cut it so close. And that's going to allow for me to bend this in, and I can make adjustments to it. And like I said, I would rather have this cut much smaller and trim away from it as I'm upholstering than to have it some of the foam exposed or the wood exposed as not supposed to. I'm also going to do one other modification to this, and I'm probably going to have to do this again. Okay, so that's my pattern for my fabric with the line. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . This one doesn't have a line because it doesn't need to. In these little cuts through here, when you're upholstering and you're trying to bend the fabric underneath, it's not going to bend so well. So what I'm going to do now, right now, this is just a starter, and I may have to cut away some more. I'm going to take my scissors, I'm going to put little snips in it. Like I said, I might even have to do a lot more trimming. This is going to give me a good indication. And this piece of lining, if it doesn't fit quite right, it's okay, because we're going to come over with fabric. But this is also going to give me a good judging on my fabric. So if I have to make adjustments on this piece as I'm upholstering it, I will know that I have to make adjustments on my material that's actually going to be covered with it. It's always hard to say exactly how much you want to do this to. I know I overcut it. So I'm going about 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch around here. And that's a good starting point. All right, so let's get our chair. Let's start upholstering.